As the sun rose over the dry plains of southern Peru and light spilled across an enormous desert that looked empty at first glance, the land slowly revealed a hidden complexity where lines, shapes, and figures stretched across the ground so precisely that they seemed less like drawings and more like messages patiently waiting to be noticed. From the ground, the Nazca Desert appeared quiet and ordinary, with reddish soil, scattered stones, and distant hills. Yet just beneath this calm surface lay one of the most astonishing human creations of the ancient world, designed not to impress nearby neighbors, but to communicate on a scale far larger than everyday life. Long before airplanes, satellites, or tall observation towers existed, the Nazca people carefully cleared dark stones from the desert floor, revealing lighter soil beneath, and in doing so created lines so long, straight, and consistent that even modern engineers pause to admire their accuracy. These lines crossed the desert in every direction, sometimes stretching for miles without wavering, sometimes forming geometric shapes, and sometimes transforming into giant animals and plants whose full forms could only be appreciated from far above the ground. Among these figures appeared birds with wings spread wide, monkeys with curling tails, spiders balanced delicately on long legs, and whales gliding across dusty earth, all rendered with a clarity that suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous decoration. The Nazca lines did not emerge overnight because creating them required patience, shared effort, and a deep understanding of landscape as generations worked together to maintain and expand patterns that slowly turned empty desert into a massive cultural canvas. To understand why the Nazca people invested so much time and energy into these creations, it helps to understand where they live, because the Nazca region was one of the driest places on Earth where survival depended on water that arrived rarely and unpredictably. Rain fell mostly in distant mountains, and rivers flowed seasonally, forcing communities to manage water with careful engineering, cooperation, and constant attention to environmental signals. Nazca farmers built underground aqueducts called puquios, which captured and guided water through stone-lined channels, allowing crops to grow even when surface rivers dried up. This constant struggle to secure water shaped Nazca beliefs, priorities, and artistic expression, encouraging people to think on large scales and to seek help from forces beyond ordinary human control. Religion played a central role in Nazca society, blending environmental observation with spiritual imagination, as people believed powerful beings influenced rain, fertility, and the balance between life and death. Ceremonies often focused on asking for rain, celebrating harvests, and ensuring that cycles of nature continued without disruption, because failure in these areas could threaten entire communities. The Nazca lines may have served as sacred pathways, ritual spaces, or symbolic offerings to deities associated with the sky, mountains, and water, rather than simple pictures meant to be admired casually. Walking along these lines could have been part of ceremonial processions, where movement across the desert became an act of prayer, devotion, and shared identity. Straight lines may have guided participants toward specific points on the horizon, aligning with hills, water sources, or celestial events that carried symbolic meaning. Geometric shapes may have marked ritual zones where offerings were made, songs were sung, and stories were retold to reinforce communal memory. Animal figures likely held special significance, representing creatures associated with fertility, power, transformation, or the natural forces people hoped to influence. Birds, often connected to the sky and rain, appeared frequently, perhaps reflecting the Nazca desire to communicate with higher realms that controlled water. The spider, associated in some Indian traditions with rain and creation, may have symbolized patience and careful weaving of life-sustaining forces. The monkey, unusual for a desert environment, suggested distant forests and abundance, perhaps representing hopes for prosperity and connection beyond the dry plains. These figures were not random decorations, because their placement and skill suggest deliberate choices tied to belief systems rather than artistic whim. Nazca artists demonstrated remarkable planning skills, laying out designs using stakes, ropes, and simple tools, proving that advanced results do not always require advanced technology. Accuracy mattered because once stones were removed, the dry climate preserved the lines for centuries, turning careful planning into lasting legacy. The desert itself became a collaborator, protecting the lines through lack of rain and minimal erosion, as if the landscape agreed to keep the Nazca messages intact. Daily life for the Nazca people continued alongside these grand creations, shaped by farming, fishing along the coast, weaving, pottery making, and maintaining water systems that demanded constant care. Nazca pottery stands out for its bright colors and dynamic imagery, often depicting the same animals, plants, and mythical beings that appeared in the desert lines. These painted vessels were not only practical objects, but also carriers of stories, rituals, and beliefs that traveled from household to household. Textiles woven from cotton and camelid fibers displayed complex patterns and skilled craftsmanship, reflecting both aesthetic sensibility and social identity. Trade connected Nazca communities with neighboring regions, bringing shells from the sea, feathers from tropical areas, and ideas that blended into local traditions. This exchange reinforced the idea that the Nazca world was not isolated, but part of a larger Andean network of interaction. Leadership within Nazca society likely combined religious authority with organizational skill, guiding communal labor and ritual life without centralized empires or massive armies. Cooperation mattered more than conquest because survival depended on shared water systems and collective response to environmental stress. Ritual leaders played key roles in interpreting signs, timing ceremonies, and maintaining social cohesion during uncertain seasons. The Nazca lines themselves may have reinforced leadership legitimacy, demonstrating the ability to organize people around shared goals that extended beyond immediate survival. Participation in line-making and ceremonies would have strengthened communal bonds, turning collective effort into spiritual investment. Children growing up in Nazca society would have learned about the lines through stories, observation, and participation, understanding them as part of the landscape rather than mysterious puzzles. They would have known which paths were sacred, which figures carried meaning, and how respect for these spaces connected daily life to cosmic forces. Over time, more lines and figures were added, layered carefully without erasing earlier designs, showing respect for tradition alongside creative expansion. This layering suggests continuity rather than sudden change, with each generation contributing its voice to a long conversation with the land. The Nazca lines were not hidden deliberately because they were visible from surrounding hills, yet their full impact unfolded gradually as one moved through the desert. Meaning emerged through experience, movement, and participation rather than quick observation. This approach matched a worldview that valued process over instant results. Environmental challenges continued to test Nazca society as droughts and changing conditions demanded resilience and adaptation. Water management remained central, reinforcing the spiritual importance of rain and fertility rituals. Art, ritual, and engineering worked together as responses to uncertainty rather than as separate activities. The Nazca lines stood at the center of the system, linking belief, environment, and community action. They transformed empty space into meaningful place. They turned walking into ritual, they made the desert speak. As centuries passed, Nazca society evolved, yet the lines remained, silent and patient, marking the land with intentions that outlived their creators. Later cultures encountered these markings without fully understanding them, adding to the sense of mystery that surrounds them today. Modern observers, equipped with airplanes and satellites, finally gained the perspective needed to see the figures completely. This new viewpoint revealed the astonishing scale of Nazca creativity. Yet seeing the lines from above does not explain why they were made. That question keeps historians curious and humble. The Nazca lines resist simple answers, they invite interpretation rather than conclusion. They challenge modern assumptions about art and purpose. For young learners, this mystery becomes an opportunity to imagine carefully and respectfully. It encourages questions rather than shortcuts. The Nazca lines remind us that ancient people thought deeply about their world. They planned patiently, they collaborated widely. They expressed belief through landscape itself. As this story continues, the desert remains our guide. Its silence holds meaning, its markings hold memory, and the Nazca lines wait, ready to lead us further into their remarkable world. As Nazca society continued to develop, the lines on the desert floor became increasingly woven into how people understood time, memory, and responsibility, functioning not as isolated artworks, but as part of a living system that connected past generations with present duties and future hopes. Walking the same paths traced by ancestors reinforced continuity, because each footprint followed lines already shaped by careful hands, reminding participants that their lives fit within patterns much larger than individual experience. Ritual movement across the desert may have helped communities remember seasonal cycles, marking moments when water was expected, crops were planted, or offerings were needed to maintain balance with unseen forces. Rather than serving as messages meant to be read once and forgotten, the lines demanded repetition because meaning grew stronger through continual use rather than dramatic revelation. This emphasis on process matched Nazca life, which required patience, planning, and steady cooperation in an environment that rarely rewarded quick solutions. Ceremonies likely involved music, chanting, costume, and symbolic objects, turning the vast desert into a stage where belief became visible through action rather than words. Participants moving along straight lines may have focused attention forward, encouraging reflection, intention, and shared purpose as bodies aligned with landscape and horizon. At intersections and geometric centers, offerings could be placed, including food, pottery, textiles, or symbolic items meant to attract favorable forces. These acts transformed abstract belief into physical commitment, reinforcing trust between community members who relied on one another for survival. Leaders guiding such ceremonies demonstrated authority through knowledge and coordination rather than command, because persuasion mattered more than coercion in a society built on cooperation. The Nazca worldview treated land as active rather than passive, meaning hills, rivers, and open spaces participated in human life rather than simply surrounding it. By marking the desert with deliberate designs, people acknowledged this relationship, turning nature into a partner rather than an obstacle. This partnership required respect because misuse of land could threaten fragile water systems and agricultural stability. Environmental stress tested these beliefs repeatedly as prolonged droughts forced communities to adjust strategies and rituals. Some scholars suggest that increased ritual activity reflected attempts to respond spiritually to worsening conditions. Others point to changes in settlement patterns as practical responses shaped by experience rather than belief alone. Both explanations likely work together because Nazca society did not separate spiritual understanding from practical decision-making. As conditions changed, certain ceremonial centers declined in importance while others gained prominence, reflecting shifting priorities rather than sudden collapse. People moved, adapted, and reorganized, carrying traditions with them as they reshaped daily life. The lines remained even as communities changed, preserving earlier intentions while accommodating new interpretations. Later groups encountered these markings as inherited landscapes, adding layers of meaning without fully knowing original purposes. This process turned the Nazca lines into cultural memory rather than fixed instruction. Their silence allowed flexibility because interpretation could evolve without contradiction. Archaeologists today reconstruct these patterns through careful mapping, excavation, and comparison rather than single dramatic discoveries. Each new finding adds nuance, revealing complexity rather than clear answers. Footpaths, offerings, and where patterns suggest repeated movement along specific routes. Pottery fragments found near lines hint at ceremonial gatherings rather than casual travel. Astronomical alignments appear in some cases, though not consistently enough to support simple explanations. This variety suggests multiple functions rather than one single purpose. Such complexity challenges modern expectations for clear labels and definitions. The Nazca lines resist being reduced to calendars, runways, or pictures alone. They demand understanding rooted in culture rather than convenience. For young learners, this uncertainty becomes a lesson in historical thinking. It shows that asking good questions matters more than forcing quick answers. The Nazca people were not mysterious because they lacked intelligence, but because their priorities differed from modern assumptions. They invested effort in meaning rather than visibility. They shaped land for experience rather than display. Their art required participation, not spectatorship. This approach contrasts sharply with monuments designed to dominate skylines. Nazca creativity unfolded horizontally rather than vertically. It invited movement rather than observation from a distance. Such choices reveal values emphasizing connection over control. Even today, walking among the lines creates a powerful emotional response. Scale becomes difficult to grasp. Orientation feels intentional. Silence feels meaningful. These sensations hint at what ancient participants may have felt. Modern technology allows aerial views, but ground-level experience still matters. Understanding requires combining perspectives rather than choosing one. The Nazca lines survive because of environmental conditions and human respect. Preservation efforts aim to balance curiosity with protection. Damage erases information as well as beauty. Responsible study ensures that questions remain possible. The Nazca story continues through research, education, and imagination. It bridges science and storytelling. It connects environment, belief, and creativity. It reminds us that ancient people solved problems through collaboration and vision. They responded to uncertainty with patience rather than panic. They expressed hope through design rather than domination. Their choices left marks that still shape understanding. As this chapter draws to a close, the desert remains marked by intention. Lines stretch across time as well as space. Figures rest quietly beneath open sky, meaning lingers without explanation. The Nazca lines continue to invite careful listening. They ask us to slow down. They ask us to look closely. They ask us to respect difference. Through them, the ancient world speaks softly yet persistently. And by following these lines, we learn that history often whispers rather than shouts.